Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome back to the Grow Podcast. My name is David, and you didn't see me last episode.
No, there was a much prettier person.
Everyone's probably very sad to see me back, but I am so excited to have you here for episode 27, Pastor Mike.
27 for a new year.
Welcome to the 27th podcast. First podcast of 2022. How does it feel?
It feels
exactly like
pretty much like before.
2021?
Yeah. The only thing is it's no longer Christmas the last one, so that's a sad thing.
Yeah. Are you a big, well, for you, Christmas is 365 days a year.
Pretty much.
You take one day off every 4 years, the 29th of February during leap year. You don't celebrate Christmas, but every other day. Yeah. Are you a New Year's person? We talked about this on the lobby at our New Hope Here campus earlier. Would have been last Sunday. But I'm not a big New Year's person. I don't understand why we celebrate it. I don't get it. It doesn't do anything for me.
Not in a huge way. I mean, we do some down home things, and just hang out at home. For some reason, our family, and even my family growing up, we're always traveling. Oh. I think part of it is the nature of the ministry. And so even this year, we were traveling on New Year's Eve. And
do you do like resolutions and things like that?
Yes and no. I think, and this even goes to what we're going to be talking about over these few weeks, I think there are natural seasons that I think God built into some things that just make for natural moments for us to do some reflection and some thing. I'm not a big resolution person. Yeah. But it may just be because I use different words. So I make, here's some goals and commitments that I've made for the coming year, and some people say that's a resolution. I don't like the word resolution.
You just choose a different word.
I just choose
say
a different
it's different.
Yes. That's pretty much it. Let's be honest.
I don't like stealing. I just like taking things that belong to other people. It's fine.
Okay, now wait a minute.
I like this plan. I'm just gonna start. I don't want to say that I do this thing.
We're gonna start redefining.
I'm gonna rename it to something else. Nothing. It's nothing. We arbitrarily pick a day to start the quote-unquote new year.
Yeah, and we celebrate it. You're the history person. What's the history?
Well, I mean, at some point, someone has to have picked a day. I mean, like the length of a year has reason behind it. That's how long it takes the Earth to travel around the sun. But I mean, why isn't April 17th the first day of the new calendar? I mean, it's just we arbitrarily pick it. We have the Julian calendar.
I wonder, here's my thing. Everybody gets kind of depressed that Christmas and the holidays are over, so we need something to go, all right, let's.
I think you're probably right.
Yes. Yeah. I just made that up on the spot.
I mean, it's reasonable. You just had this big moment of celebration, and then you have nothing. So let's wear glasses that say 2022 and watch a ball drop in New York City.
Yeah. Do you watch the New Year's Eve stuff?
No. We had friends when we still lived in Minnesota that we didn't have kids then, so we would go spend the New Year's Eve night or whatever with them and drink sparkling apple juice or all the different stuff. But one year we watched the watermelon drop, which is the single greatest television production in human history. It was on Channel 45, local Minnesota television. Wow. And it was incredible, like terrible on purpose. It was just ridiculous. And we didn't even know it was on. We just found it and we couldn't stop watching. And then it never came back and we were sad.
Watching a train wreck.
I found the creator of it on Twitter and talked with him a bit and told him how brilliant we thought it was, but it never came back. It was too bad. No, I'm not really big into anything New Year's.
No, part of what I do, and there are certain times of the year, and this just happens to be one of them because of the break of things, I'll take some extra time for reflection and then pencil some things out. Here's, some things. So the calendar year, for us as a church, our ministry year, so like my summer, I'll take some of those times. And I think those are natural times, reflection and commitments. We need those kinds of moments. So I got a serious all of a sudden.
You did. You do that sometimes.
Yeah.
We've got a new series that just started at New Hope
Yep.
called The Best Year Yet.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about The Best Year Yet.
Best year yet. So we're walking into or through a part of the very first book of the Bible. It's a great place to begin a new year. Yeah. It happens to be the book of
Genesis.
Genesis, which means beginnings. Yeah. So beginning. And if you join us on the weekends, you'll hear me say this almost every week, just because I think it's probably a cool thing to say. But the beginning is a great place to begin a new year. But we're walking through the life of Abraham, but probably in a way that most people haven't. Mm-hmm. So Abraham's life, and scholars have really studied this, can kind of be divided into 5 moments or 5 spiritual transaction moments, often called the 5 altars of Abraham. They're 5 decisions that he made based on things that he learned about God, things that he learned about the life God designed for him, and things that he learned about himself. And those are 5 things that I think are real important. They're in the Bible, so obviously they're important, but real important for us to learn if we want to begin to experience God's favor and God's blessing. We'll talk a little bit about what that means as we walk through the series.
So where are we going to start on the podcast today then?
Well, I want to start with kind of the concept of who God is. The title of the podcast is, we call it the Grow Podcast. You're just waiting to see if I actually knew, right?
You do the intro every week, so.
Yeah. Is the Grow Podcast. And, we did a whole series last fall on who God is. But one of the things we didn't touch on a lot that I think is a real good thing for us to be aware of, especially as we begin a new year, is God is a God of growth. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the mistakes that we make is we tend to think of he's perfect, therefore he's static.
Sure.
And in one sense, God doesn't change. But God is creative. He is creativity within himself, and he is growth-oriented. I mean, he created us, and he created us to grow, and that's who God is, and he wants you and me to grow. So right at the beginning of the entire story arc that God is writing with and through and in our lives is the whole idea of he designed you and me to grow, and he constantly wants and is inviting you and I to join him on the journey, what we call on the Grow Podcast, your next step. Yeah. So that's really kind of where we're starting, is how God can help you grow. And you think about it this way, if I can just dive into it a little bit, name a person whose God story we have in the Bible. And you'll find some common things with all of them. You'll find one, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a couple weekends in the weekend teaching. God always initiates. We tend to think what? We tend to think, okay, if I'm going to go to God, it's my idea. Mm-hmm. God's always the one who pursues, draws, who introduces us, doesn't force himself on us.
Yeah.
But if you're listening right now, it's not an accident. It's because he made it possible.
Yeah.
He didn't make the decision for you, but he made it possible. So he always initiates. And so when we go ahead.
Why sometimes when we feel like, at least, that we're looking for him, does it feel like we're having to do all the work to go find, when we feel alone, we feel like God's distant.
Yeah.
I've experienced that. I'm guessing you have at times in your life too, where you're like, where you at, man? Like, I needed you here, and it doesn't feel like he's initiating it.
And I don't know that there's a simple answer to that.
Sure.
I mean, you read through the book of Psalms, which is a great place to read and study why that is. But you find out all kinds of different things for that. Some of it it's not him, it's us.
Right.
We've talked about that some. There's something in my way, something blocking my way. Sometimes, and there's a repeating principle we're going to talk about in this series, both in the Grow Podcast some and on the weekends a lot, is God is a God of order, and he designed things to work according to a certain order. Mm-hmm. One of the examples we use when we'll talk about in this series on the weekends is God made gravity. And which means you throw something and it's going to do what? It's going to.
I thought Isaac Newton made
going to fall. No, he discovered gravity. You jump off a building, and you're going to.
Don't do that.
Fall. He created things to work a certain way. So one of the things to think about in terms that he created you and I to grow best a certain way.
Yeah.
It may be unique to you, and sometimes growth is not easy.
Sure.
And sometimes, in fact, more often than not, it takes work. We'll talk about that a little bit further. And you think about, and let's go back to, the stories we have, the God stories we have of people like Abraham, whose stories we're going to talk about in the series, or Paul. Whenever they began to grow, there was always stretching. There's going to be there's something uncomfortable about stretching when you aren't used to it.
Yep.
You get more used to it, like those who live in that athletic world may or may not become, but it's just
people like you, pure athletes like you.
Yes, like me. So when God takes you on your journey, He's going to change your thinking. He's going to stretch your thinking. He's going to change your relationships. There's always a part of letting go. We might call it loss, but there are things that we tend to hold on to that God says, you don't need to hold on to. So when in that next step, there's almost always something He says, I want you to let go of that so that you can have
feels
that.
like loss in the moment for us, but usually you can go back and look at it and see how it was a positive step.
Think about with kids, and you've got 2 little ones in your house. You want to give them something, but in order to give them something, they can't hold on to this. I want to give you this. Yeah. I don't know how it was for you guys with your kids opening Christmas presents. When our oldest was young, we learned very quickly. We spaced opening Christmas presents over several days because he would open it and he'd be so enthralled with that, and we'd be like, "Okay, next, go to next." And we kind of feel that way. It's like God's saying, "I want you to do this now," but I'm still back here with this. So there's a little bit of that. Stretching, next step, will always take more faith than any previous step. You think about that, and as you trace that, wherever God is taking you, He's going to stretch you more. So it will always take more faith than your previous step, and that's where we're talking about in the life of Abraham.
Yeah,
you just read the very first time we're introduced to Abraham, Genesis 12, verse 1, where God says, "It's God." Notice it starts. Then the Lord said to Abraham, not Abraham went to God. The Lord said to Abram, so it started with God. God invited him. And then listen to what He says. Leave your country. So there's a sense of stretching. There's a change. Leave your people. Leave your father's household and go to the land I will show you. So there's more faith than ever before. And you think about it in those terms. So as you and I move into this new year, if you want to go deep with God, you need to be ready to say yes to being stretched. Yes to letting go of something you're currently holding on to, and yes to it's going to feel like I'm taking a bigger risk than ever before.
Yeah. What if I don't feel ready? Right? Like, okay, I
don't know that we ever fully feel ready. But yeah.
Right. So I feel like sometimes we use an excuse of like, well, I need to study more before I say yes to God in this area, or I need. I've met with 3 pastors, but I need to meet with 7 before I, finally.
Yeah.
What would you say in that scenario? As we almost try to put it off by I'm going to pray more about it.
Yeah. Well, and I would go back to really the primary thing we talked about this last weekend. Notice the first thing when you read through Abraham's story, God invites him, gives him the promise, and then the first thing Abraham did, he said yes. See, God, we don't like the obedience word, but that's really what it is. Are we going to follow Him? Are we going to obey Him? You will never experience all of God's favor and all of God's design for your life if you aren't willing to say yes to Him. And until you're willing to say yes, you're going to miss it. But here's the good news. And actually, I think it'll be week 2 or 3 on the weekends. We'll talk about this. The good news is you're almost always, this sounds like a positive affirmation quote, but it's a biblical, you're almost always one obedience away from God's best. Think, if Abraham had said no to this, he would have missed it. So if you don't feel like you're ready, part of what God is saying is good. Is it yes or no?
Yeah. And you're talking about more than just like that first yes we say.
Yes.
Like, yes, Jesus, I accept what you as my Savior, and I ask for forgiveness.
That's the first step. In fact, we even talked about that on Christmas Eve, if you were with us Christmas Eve. at New Hope is forgiveness. We need forgiveness, and it's free. You don't have to do anything to it. But it's how God opened the door for us to be in a relationship to follow Him. It's the first step.
So if it's free and that forgiveness happens, then why do I have to continue to say yes to Jesus or yes to God's prodding or whatever?
Because the forgiveness was so that we could begin to experience the life. And we tend to think about it in negative terms, like we think about obedience as negative. As a parent, you think about obedience differently, right? I'm trying to save your life here. I'm trying to teach you how to live life. And we tend to view God from the child's point. You want me to do what? And He's going, I want to give you and teach you how to live life to the full and the way it was meant to be lived. So it's a change in perspective.
Yeah, it's that first yes isn't like we're not playing Monopoly and getting a get out of jail free card.
Right.
And that's like you said, that yes is to open yourself up to this relationship that then will continue to grow.
It's like being invited into a house. The first step is walking through the door.
Sure.
And forgiveness is the door. You're invited in free. And now that you're in, I'm going to teach you how to maintain, how to live, how to enjoy the house that I'm giving you. But you can go and live in a house
and just stand in the front
and
entryway.
just stand in the front and totally miss out on the rest of it. Well, long pause there.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, what are we going to talk about next?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the promises then.
Yeah. This is a cool thing. So, and again, we touched about it a little bit this last week, and there's 3 promises. Some people say more, but there's 3 promises that God made to Abram, later called Abraham: a place, a people, and a purpose. And I don't want to repreach the teaching, but a place, yes, was geography. But for most people, up until fairly recent in human history, geography was identity. We get confused somewhat here in the United States and in the Western world when people, are fighting for their land, but we realize it's not more than their land. It's like, this is who I am. Because there's most of the time in human history, where I live talks about who I am, and it defines so much about my country, about my background. Like for you and for me, we'll joke sometimes. I was born in Minnesota,
the greatest state in the union.
Yeah, we talk about Minnesota, and there's part of it. If you were born there, if you grew up there, there's some of that. That's part of you, right? And we just don't fully understand it. But for Abram, that mattered. It was more than geography; it was identity, a people. We all want people to belong to, so these deep relationships, and a purpose. It was more than a task that God was giving him. He was saying, I want to teach you how to live life here and into eternal life with the kind of satisfaction and contentment that, this is who I'm supposed to be. And the incredible thing about that, these 3 promises, is they weren't just made to Abram. They were made to him and his descendants. So if you go into the New Testament, actually multiple places. Genesis 3 is one of those we talked about this week, and it says if you belong to Christ, in other words, if you've asked Jesus to be the forgiver of your sins, like we were just talking about, then you have become the true children of Abraham, because Abraham is called the father of our faith. This is really one of the first places we see God stepping in and beginning the plan that leads to Jesus and ultimately to the church. But the last part of Genesis 3:29 says, what God promised to him is now available to you. So the sense of identity, the sense of relationships, and the sense of purpose, that's God's plan and desire for you. So this isn't just an ancient promise that we're reading. It's very current.
So how do we experience that promise?
Well, the first one we've already talked about, and we touched about this weekend, touched on this last weekend, obedience.
Yep.
Is if God asks you to do something and you say no, then it's not that God punishes you by saying, well, then you don't get the promise. But you've just said, I don't like going back to the house analogy. If God says, I want to invite you into the dining room and the kitchen to show you how it works, and you say, no, I'm going to hang out. I'm going to hang out in what's the front room of the house called? The foyer? The entryway. I'm going to hang out in the entryway. And is God saying, well, then you're punished? No, we just said no.
Yeah.
And that's really what this comes into. So, or what comes into play here. So what God is saying is, I want to show you how this house works. I want to show you how this life works. And Abram chose to obey. And the cool thing, and we're going to see this 5 times, is he built an altar. He built an altar. And all an altar is, we'll talk more about it next week, is a place of spiritual transaction and memory. Spiritual transaction. In other words, I know I'm human and I'm going to forget this commitment. Right? I mean, he knew himself. And that's what the altars are. And again, we'll talk more next week about what they are.
That's what similar to what I say to people when I meet them for the first time. I say,
Can you help me with this?
I'm going to forget your name, so please help me with that next time.
Yeah. And so what did he do? He put a pile of rocks together, and not just a random pile. There was a certain order to them, which again reflects the fact God says there's a pattern, there's an order to the way things, and you're going to forget things, so I'm going to teach you how to do this. So he marked it so that when they were to walk by, nomadic people, they're going to come back by this. Yep, that's where I learned something about God. He taught me something about himself. But I think the second thing, and we didn't talk about this weekend, is to begin to process the promises.
How do you mean?
What I mean by that is instead of just reading those and going, okay, God promised a place, a people, a purpose, start by spending time figuring out what is God's design and plan for my life. When he says he's going to give me a place, an identity, what does that really mean?
How do I go about?
And again, I'm kind of setting up next week, but part of it is make a commitment right off the bat to, I'm going to search this out in his word. I'm going to study his word. What does he say about who I am? What does he say about what relationships are supposed to look like? Not just what Dr. Phil says. And Dr. Phil says some good things, but the good things he had were all God's idea in the first place. And then a purpose. What does God say about that? But not just that. It's not just learning, but then also in processing. I need to process this with other people. When Jesus gave his last commission, his last commandment, we call it the Great Commission, and really the conception of the church, he said, "Go therefore and make," what was the word? Make disciples. What does it mean to make a disciple? It means to hang out with someone who is a little bit ahead of me, and I learn from their example. Yeah. We learn best by watching and processing with other people. And this is another one of those things I think we've messed up in the church. We've turned it into, I just need to fill my head with information because we live in an information age. And not process it with people of, how are you doing that in your life? What did you learn? And that's why weekend gatherings are so important. So much here. That's why small groups are important. For those who join us, are part of our online campus. You don't just sit and watch. You've got to get in a gathering somehow and process. And I think the third thing is take faith risks. So in Hebrews 10, it talks about not giving up meeting together to make sure we're processing. In James, it says, don't just read the word or don't just study it, but actually do it. And this goes back to what you were saying. Is some of us feel like, I need to get all the ducks in a row before I can do this. And God's saying, some of you need to be like, and I'll pick on a story you hopefully are familiar with, be like Peter in the boat who says, if that's you, tell me to get out. And Jesus says, all right, I haven't taught you how to walk on water, but go ahead and get out, And he does. And we kind of make fun of him because he sinks, but he's the only person other than Jesus who walked on water that I'm aware of, But was he fully developed in his faith yet? Absolutely not. Right. Did he know everything he needed to know yet? No, but he did some faith. So he took a faith risk. So I think those three things need to be, I need to have a plan to learn. I need to have a people to be around. And I need to be taking some steps that stretch me right now, even if I don't feel like I'm ready for it yet.
Yeah. What homework do you have for us this week?
So here's the homework, and this is just kind of an introductory to where we're going. Kind of 2 parts. 1, make a commitment that in 2022, that's so weird for me to start saying, every year there's something. 2022, I'm going to, and we would all love to make this commitment, right? But I'm going to pursue God's plan for my life and obey it. And here's the commitment. make your own kind of altar moment, because you're going to forget it. You're going to drift. I don't mean to discourage you, but you're gonna. I do. Sure. You will. You're gonna drift. So whether it's a sticker on your bathroom mirror, I talk about that a lot because I do that. Whether it's a background on your computer or whatever, something to prompt you. I made this commitment, because your life will always go in the direction of your strongest thoughts. So make this. That's why altars are important. Make this an altar moment. Second part of this is have a plan. Put a plan in place to begin to process this. So just your first step with that is find a Bible reading plan.
Yep.
We're going to go deeper into how to read the Bible next week. But just right now at the beginning of the year, find a Bible reading plan.
Yep. Which the YouVersion app is, it's certainly not the only way to do that, but it's the easiest way to do that. Just download the YouVersion Bible app. There's just a million curated reading plans. You can search for, I want this specifically.
In fact, if you do this, and this link should be active no matter when you're watching it, you can text us at 97000, and put in the text NH for New Hope, NH Bible Reading Plan, and we'll text you 2 suggestions, one kind of a 201 level and one kind of a 101 level to get you going if you can't find one of your own.
Perfect. Well, let's make sure we do that. Remember, we say it all the time here on the Grow podcast, but growth always starts with the next step. So let's make sure we're taking these next steps that Pastor Mike gives us. I'm very excited for this series, excited to see where you take us through it, and in the new year that I'm so excited about. But I am excited for the new series. And so thank you, Pastor Mike. Thank all of you for being here. If you haven't, I just threw my pen by accident.
Wow, you are excited.
If you haven't subscribed yet to the podcast, wherever you listen to it, on Spotify, iTunes, or on YouTube, so make sure you do that so that you get notified when the new episodes go up. We just had a little break, our first ever break, really. Wow. So we're glad to be back. And we're glad to spend this time with all of you. Hopefully we'll see you next week.